the Sopwith 2F.1 Camel. An intriguing question relating to the British military aircraft of the 1914-18 war is why it apparently took so long to get the Sopwith 2F.1 into production. The airplane that was in effect the prototype 2F.1 had the official serial number N5 and was flying as early as March 1917. Yet production 2F.1s did not begin to appear until the autumn of 1917. Moreover, the prototype had appeared hard on the heels of the report of a special committee by the Grand Fleet, appointed by Admiral Beatty, to consider and report on the fleet's requirement of aircraft. This committee presented its report on 5th of February 1917. One of the more significant recommendations was that some light cruisers and other selected ships should be equipped with a means of carrying and launching Sopwith pups. At such a time, the Camel's greater power and better performance should have recommended it automatically as an early substitute for the pup. By early 1917, when the F-1 Camel had appeared, the Sopwith baby seaplane had been in operational use for 2 years, and, being little more than a slightly refined version of the tabloid seaplane that had won the Schneider Trophy contest in April 1914, could not reasonably be expected to meet the more exacting operational demands of the immediate future. Presumably, with a view to providing a more modern and better armed aircraft as a replacement for the baby, the Sopwith Company designed a single-seat twin-float seaplane based on the Camel and intended for the 130-horsepower Clerget engine. This seaplane was designated Sopwith FS-1 and was designed for shipboard use. Its main floats were plain pontoons, 11 feet in length. The tail float was of circular cross-section and fine streamline form. The aircraft was designed from the beginning to have a pair of jettisonable wheels for deck takeoffs. This technique had been pioneered as early as the 6th of August 1915 by a Sopwith Schneider on HMS Campania. To conserve space on board ship, the fuselage was made in 2 parts that were butt-jointed immediately behind the trailing edge of the lower wings and could be separated for stowage. The overall span was reduced to 27 feet by fitting a center section that was shorter than that of the F-1 Camel. The center section struts were of streamlined section steel tubing. A significant change was made in the aircraft's armament. In place of the Camel's twin Vickers guns, the FS-1 was intended to have a single Vickers gun in the port position and a fixed Lewis gun mounted inverted above the center section, its ammunition drum fitting into the trailing edge cutout. No doubt this was done in the hope that drums could be changed without the complication of a movable mounting to lower the gun. Conclusive evidence of the existence of the FS-1 has yet to be found, but it seems probable that it was built as N4, and that it was the Camel seaplane that was reported to have been wrecked late in March 1917. The earliest known photograph of N5 shows it to be precisely a landplane version of the FS-1, even to the fitting of a fixed inverted Lewis gun on the center section. It has been said that N5 crashed on its second flight, on 27 March 1917. If this did in fact occur, the damage must have been slight and quickly repaired, for Martlesham Heath's test report on the aircraft is dated March 1917, and on 4th April, N5 was at the Isle of Grain. On that date it was flown by Harry Bustede, who wrote that he was not favorably impressed. The reference to a crash seems more likely to be a confusion with that of the FS-1. By early June 1917, N5 had been fitted with launching tubes for 8 Le Prieur rockets, 4 on each pair of interplane struts. Doubtless because it had proved to be well nigh impossible to change drums on an inverted Lewis gun, that weapon was now carried on an Admiralty top plane mounting, and could be let down through the central cutout in the center section for reloading or upward firing. The Vickers gun was provided with 250 rounds of ammunition, and there were 2 97-round drums for the Lewis. The 8 rockets and their launching gear weighed 47 pounds. A wireless set was also installed, and inflatable airbags in the fuselage provided a form of flotation gear. Thus loaded, N5 weighed 1,532 pounds in flying trim and climbed to 10,000 feet in 11 minutes. During the summer of 1917, much progress was made in deck flying using pups, including the evolution of the technique of flying from tiny platforms aboard warships. Despite the tricky flying characteristics of the F-1 Camel, the good performance of N-5 must have made it seem to be a potentially good shipboard fighter. The whole of the foregoing history provides ample reasons why production of the type did not start until summer of 1917. The situation is the more interesting because it is possible that N-5 itself may have been intended to be a float plane. The Sopwith Company are reported to have made a second set of floats for a float plane version of the Camel, but there is no record of their use. 50 production aircraft, N6600 to N6649, were ordered from Sopwith with the designation Sopwith 2F.1. Deliveries began in autumn 1917. N6603 was at the Isle of Grain on the 5th of November. The Sopwith Company was then fully committed to production of camels and dolphins and to the development of further prototypes. Consequently, the initial order of 50 2F1s was supplemented by a contract for 100 N6750 to N6849 from William Beardmore & Company, Limited, of Dalmuir. The Beardmore Company had been major contractors for the shipboard version of the Sopwith Pup and its derivative, the Beardmore WB3. The last WB3, an SB3D, was delivered in December 1917, and production of the Sopwith 2F1 must have followed on immediately. The first Beardmore-built 2F1, N6750, flew on the 20th of February. It and N6751 to N6754 were delivered to Rosyth. Of the others, it is known that N6755 to N6773 were delivered to Turnhouse, and it seems that most of the others went initially to Renfrew. From the Royal Naval Air Service depots, the 2F1s were issued to capital ships, but some went farther afield. For instance, N6803 and N6808 went to Malta. N6812 and N6814 to Felixstowe. The standard power unit of the production Sopwith 2F1 was the 150 horsepower BR1, but the 130 horsepower Clerget was regarded as an alternative. The dihedral angle of the lower wings was slightly increased to 5 degrees 30 minutes. In June 1918, two F-1 Camels of the light cruisers Sydney, Melbourne, and Galatia, and the carrier Furious were in action against German seaplanes. On 19th July, 7 2F1s of HMS Furious bombed the Zeppelin base at Tondern with outstanding success. The Zeppelins L-54 and L-60 were destroyed in their sheds. Only 2 of the Camels returned to the naval task force that had brought them from Rosyth. As another means of getting fast fighting aircraft to sea, experiments were conducted with Sopwith F-1 and 2 F-1 Camels carried on lighters that were towed by destroyers. The first test, on 30th May 1918, was a failure, because the 2 F-1's distinguished pilot, Lieutenant Colonel C.R. Sampson, insisted on fitting his aircraft, N6623, with a skid undercarriage like that of the Sopwith 9901A Pup. The skids were supposed to run in troughs rigged up on the lighter, but in the event they jumped from their guides, fouled the supporting structure, and the Camel fell over the bow. Sampson was, miraculously, unhurt. Greater success was achieved by Lieutenant S.D. Cully, who, flying the Beardmore-built N6812, made a successful takeoff from a lighter towed by HMS Redoubt on 10th August 1918 and shot down the Zeppelin L-53. This 2F1 was armed with twin fixed Lewis guns on the center section. Reloading was not possible. Cully and a warrant shipwright of Felixstowe had evolved a jettisonable undercarriage for the Sopwith 2F1. This was demonstrated on the 20th September 1918 by Lieutenant R.E. Keyes, DFC. And a similar device was fitted to other F1 and 2F1 Camels. Keyes was the pilot of the other Beardmore-built 2F1 that had been sent to Felixstowe, N68-14, when it was successfully air-launched from a British airship, R-23, in the summer of 1918. The Sopwith-built 2F1, N6622, was also used in these experiments. Of the 129 Sopwith 2F1s that were on charge with the Royal Air Force on 31st October 1918, all but 17 were with units of the Grand Fleet. Expanded production was planned, but the contracts given to the Ferry, Pegler, and Sage companies were cancelled when the war ended. Some 2F1s saw continued operational use in the Baltic operations against the Bolsheviks in 1918 to 1920. These were the aircraft of the carrier Vindictive and the light cruiser Delhi, which operated from the carrier and from a rough 300-yard landing strip at Koivisto. At least one 2F1 had Estonian markings, possibly at a later date, while retaining its British serial number. At the end of November 1919, 3 of Vindictive's 2F1 Camels were sent to Riga for the use of the Latvian forces. All 3 were still in use in August 1921. The 2F1 remained in British service as a carrier-borne fighter for some years after the war. At the Isle of Grain, 2F1s and pups were flown in tests of overhead landing gear, the object of which was to enable aircraft to be retrieved by flying onto a cable carried outboard of the ship, stretched between 2 booms. This was clearly an extension of the wartime practice of flying fighters from battleships, and was intended to avoid the otherwise inevitable loss of the aircraft after a flight at sea. A Camel, probably a 2F1, was in use at Grain in March 1920, testing the device. Several different types of overwing hook were tested on a long cable stretched between tall posts. And by February 1921, N7352 had been fitted with an elaborate arrangement described as airship and overhead wire landing gear for small craft. Thus, Britain's Royal Air Force anticipated by several years the U.S. Navy's work with airborne fighters. But the British idea was never developed. In the post-war years, some 2F1s were sent to Canada and saw long service. Here's an interesting comment on my last video on the Sopwith F1 Camel by my friend Warbles On A Lot, who lives down under and always has something interesting to say. G'day! Yay team! Well done, very nice indeed. I thought you might have mentioned that the night-fighting Comic Camel was developed by Durbin Armstrong, the notoriously exhibitionist exponent of low-level aerobatics performed in a camel. He was killed while performing his party piece the day after the armistice was signed, flat-spinning into the ground, as did many a camel. All of them, following an unreported heavy landing, had stretched the center section bracing wires going from the upper ends of the cabane struts down to the fuselage upper longerons, upon which the entire weight of the machine depended when the weight was on the wheels. Stall too high up, bounce onto the ground, and stretch those wires, the tension in which was the only factor holding the lower ends of the cabane struts into their locating sockets. If those wires were not inspected, tested for tension, and retightened before the next flight, then any application of positive G beyond 1.5 or so, and the bottom of the cabane struts lifted out of the sheet metal sockets, permitting the upper wing center section and top wing to shift and be sucked forwards by the center of pressure. This rendered the already tail-heavy Camel absolutely unrecoverable from the spin it entered after stalling, as soon as the cabanes dislocated under the effect of pulling out of a dive or a spin, or attempting to snap roll an affected machine. Captain Norman McMillan, who commanded RAF Gosport Training Aerodrome, drastically reduced the kill rate among his Camel students and instructors by instigating a super-strict regimen of reporting, inspection, testing those wires after the slightest hint of a bounced landing. And at a commemorative dinner in 1963, he discussed the issue with T.O.M. Sopwith, who confirmed McMillan's opinion regarding the matter. Armstrong's machine had been surreptitiously flown, without his knowledge, while he was away from the aerodrome, the day before his final flight. Half an hour with a hand drill and 4 mild steel bolts could have safetied every Camel in the fleet. But, time secrecy, old bean. Think of the devastating moral effect if the secret of the Camel's fatal weakness had been allowed to become generally known, or some such. I have a veritable slab of Camel minutiae videos in my personal aeroplanology playlist. You might well enjoy them. Keep on keeping on. Stay safe. Ciao. Yes, this is the sort of top-notch comment that I expect from my valued viewers. And, of course, there are a lot of extra leftover pictures of the F.1 Camel, and here's just some of them. Well, this was the last airplane in Volume 2 of this book series, with one more to go. I'm going to take a break for a little bit and do some videos on guitar building and playing, which are long overdue. Unfortunately, people don't seem to care much about guitar videos these days, but I'm going to go ahead and make them anyway, because I don't want this knowledge dying with me. But I promise I'll be back.